Hello everyone, welcome back to another Maker Club. If you remember last week I showed you how to make this really easy DIY loom using just cardboard, tape, and yarn. And today I'm going to show you how to actually weave on your loom. So I have just gray yarn here and a yarn needle. If you don't have yarn needle, that's okay. You can always do it with your hands, but the yarn needle does make it a little bit easier. So the first thing I'm going to do is just thread my yarn needle and make sure I have quite a bit of extra space. That way it doesn't come out, but not too much extra that I start getting confused with it. And the actual task of weaving is super easy. It just consists of going over, under, over, under, over, under, all the way to the end of the line, flipping around and doing the same thing coming back. Okay, so when you have a yarn needle, you can make it quite easy. So I'm gonna go under my first piece of yarn here. Okay, so when you're going under the first one, you're gonna go over the next one. And this is where having a yarn needle comes in handy, because you can kind of do the whole row almost with the yarn needle and then pull the yarn through at the end. I would recommend doing it this way rather than going underneath and pulling it through and then going over and pulling it through. It just, sometimes you can get a little bit confused then with which ones you've already done. So I would recommend almost trying to do the whole row kind of almost at once. So you can see we've gone under and we've gone over. So now we need to go under again, over again, under again, over again. And doing this method, especially if you have a yarn needle, is going to make it really easy to be able to make sure that you don't miss anything, so you don't actually go like over two at once. You want to make sure that you're going over, under, otherwise there are going to be like little gaps in your weaving. So we're going to go under, over, under, over. And now we're reaching kind of the end of our needle here. So I'm just going to grab it through here and I'm making sure, okay, we're under and we're over. So we need to go under, over, under, over. And now I'm just going to pull it all the way through. I'm going to make sure I pull a lot. I haven't cut the yarn from my skein yet, because I want to try to go for as far as possible until I actually have to cut it and tie it, and I'll show you what that looks like. So here, the next part is going to be transitioning to the next row, and what's important is that whatever we did on our last vertical yarn here, we want to do the opposite coming back. So as you can see, this yarn is over this vertical piece of yarn. So we want to start the next row going the opposite direction and then alternating the opposite way. So every piece that the yarn previously went over is now going to be under. Okay, so your next row is going to be under, over, under, over, under, over. I'm just going to pull that a little bit. And now remember, we were over our last one, so we're gonna go under, over, under. And if you ever get lost, or you kind of like lose your place in the yarn, you can easily tell what you have to do by looking at the row previously. Okay, so I'm gonna pull that through again too, and I'm just gonna use my fingers to push it up against the other side. Now, depending on how thick of a yarn you use, as you can see, this yarn is quite a bit thinner than this yarn, so the blue yarn is really going to show through a lot. But if you were to use a much thicker yarn than this gray yarn, but also much thicker than this yarn, you might not see the blue as much. You can also change colors if you'd like to, and I'm going to get through a couple more rows before I show you how to do that. So again, we ended this one on an over. So we're gonna go under, over, under, over. And we're looking, if I get confused, I see, okay, this last piece of yarn is going over this one, so I need to go under here. And you're just gonna keep doing this. Either if you wanna use just one color, you keep doing it until you reach the bottom of your weaving. Or if you wanna do another color, what you're gonna do is you're gonna stop and tie it off and then start the same thing with the other color. Okay, I'm gonna push this up here. So basically, I'm gonna show you how to tie off now. So I'll continue weaving with what's left on this, but just to show you how to tie off, what I'm going to do is take a piece of yarn here. This is the yarn coming out from where we started. And we're going to wrap it around this first one. Just like that. Okay, so now we've got a loop going around the first one, and then we're just going to take this string and put it through the loop and tie it off. And that's it. And then if you want to, you can double knot it. You put an extra little knot here and push it towards the bottom. And now you're pretty securely on this line, and you want to cut, making sure you don't cut that loop, but cut pretty close to it so you don't have a ton of excess yarn. And that's how you tie off the start, that's how you tie off the finish. So if I wanted to end here and move on to a different color, I would do that same exact process over here. I would tie this in a knot around this last string and cut it, and then I would start this whole process again with the new color. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to continue going with this color. So I'm going to cut here, and then I'll come back when I'm at the end, and I'll show you how to finish it and how to take it off the loom. Okay, and see you in a bit. Okay, so I've just done quite a bit of work on my weaving project here, and I'm nearing the end. I did have to start another string of yarn because I ran out earlier. But I'm going to show you how to do the last row, since I'm kind of running out of space to being able to use my needle yarn, or my yarn needle rather. I'm going to show you how to do it if you don't have a yarn needle, which is exactly the same as if you did have a yarn needle. You're just going to go over, under, over, under. It's just going to be a little bit harder because you're going to use your fingers, and you have to be careful not to pull the yarn too hard. And that's the case even if you have a yarn needle. You just want to be careful that you're not yanking the yarn too hard, or it can come up from the tape or get unstuck. So I'm just going to very carefully lift up, and I'm still going over, under, over, under. I know it's kind of hard to see what I'm doing with my hands, but I'm just basically lifting up every other string and going underneath it, because then I know that it'll be over, under. And something I forgot to say before is that if you do either run out of yarn or you want to change colors, you always want to make sure that you're starting your next color or your next piece of yarn the opposite way as your last piece ended off. So like, for example, this row just ended off with me going under the last string, so I'll tie it off, and then if I was going to keep going, the next row would have to start going over the top. Otherwise, you're gonna get two rows that look exactly the same. But I'm gonna end it here. So the first thing I'm gonna do is tie off this one. So I'm just gonna cut, just like I did before, I'm gonna cut a little bit, wrap it around this first string, which is a little difficult because my first string isn't on top of, my first two strings actually aren't on top of this cardboard, so they're not lifted up. So it gets a little bit difficult, and I have to be careful also not to pull it too tight or it will bend like it has been. But you know, if you've made your loom a bit bigger than mine, then you shouldn't have that problem. And if you do, you just work around it. Okay, so I'm gonna tie this into a knot. Here we go, and then just to make it super secure, I'm gonna double tie it. Just a regular plain old knot, try to get it as close to the string as I can. I'm gonna cut that as close as I can to the knot without damaging it. And then I'm gonna do the same thing on the bottom here, which is a little bit easier because we have some extra space. So I'm gonna tie it around and then pull the end of the string through. And if you want to double knot a little bit easier, you can actually just pull the string through again before you secure it down. Pull nice and tight and cut. And that is the end of the weaving part of it. The next thing to do would be to take it off the loom, which would just remove our tape. Okay, and now we have our weaving project. but we want to make sure that it's not going to go anywhere, right? Okay, because it's still a little bit unstable the way it is. So we want to make sure that it's not going to go anywhere, and the way that we do that is we simply tie off two. So we're going to take the first two pieces of yarn here and tie them together in a double knot. So one knot and two knots. And you can even do this actually on the loom if you wanted to. You could just pull off two at a time and tie them and then do the next two. That way you don't get confused, but I'm just gonna do it off the loom. So I'm gonna set those aside because those are finished. And then I'm gonna take the next two and I'm gonna tie those together. The first knot, you're pulling gently just to get it down to the bottom. You're not pulling it too tight. And then the second knot, you can pull a little bit tighter. Set those aside. All right, I'm gonna continue doing this and probably speed through it and then come back when we're done. All right, so that's the end of that. You might have been able to see there that I actually got a little bit messed up here because I tied the wrong two together. So if that happens, you just undo them and retie them. Same thing if you mess up in your weaving, if you accidentally go the wrong way, if you go under twice, you just undo it and redo it, and it's not that big of a deal. Now you could leave it like this. Oh, and also if you made your loom with an uneven amount of notches, like let's just say you had 15 instead of 14, you would just tie the last three together. So you just like tie two together and then tie the last one to that two, and it's no big deal. So you could leave it like this, or I'm actually gonna trim mine a little bit, and you could put like, you could put beads on the end if you want. You could really do kind of whatever you want. You can make it long and thin and make it like a bookmark. You can make it a bit bigger and have it like a wall hanging or something like that. It's kind of, you can kind of do whatever you want with it. This is just the skill to learn how to weave, and then it's up to you to kind of be creative and figure out what else you can do with it. So that is about it. And if you give it a try, make sure you post it on Instagram or a Padlet. If you post on Instagram, tag us at EBP Library Kids. And that's it. And I hope we see you next Monday. All right. Have a good week. Bye.